hello. It's time for another episode of Tell Me More, a hospitality data podcast. Thank you, as always, for joining us. I'm Stephanie Ricca here with STR's Isaac Collazo and CoStar's Jan Freitag. Hi, guys.
Hello, Steph.
Hey, Stephanie.
October and November are almost in the rearview mirror. Can you believe it? Meaning that the year is wrapping up. That also means, from a hotel data perspective, that the final forecast revision of the year from STR and Tourism Economics is out. Isaac, get us started with the latest hotel performance data.
Yeah, I think, Steph, the key highlights for the month are three things, basically. Second highest U.S. RevPAR growth of the year. All U.S. chain scales saw RevPAR growth. And then changing gears a little bit, global RevPAR, excluding the U.S., was up 7.5% in the month. And for the year, it's up 6.7%. So let's get into the details.
Tell us more.
Yeah, I'll tell you more here. October was a solid month, right, for the U.S. hotel industry, with RevPAR up 4.1%. But several factors were at play. I think this is the key to this. The Jewish observances, which took place in October from September last year, were expected to soften performance, but the fact that they occurred closer and or on a weekend minimized their impact. October's calendar composition was also a positive for travel, as 2 weekdays, Wednesday and Thursday, replaced the weaker Sunday and Monday from the previous year. Then we had the impacts of Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, which drove demand in the southeast from Florida to Tennessee, including the Carolinas. Another factor, Halloween on Thursday compared to Tuesday last year, lessened the impact on business and group demand.
What was your costume?
My costume, I was a data guy, always a data guy.
Oh,
In other words,
that's
a
a
nerd.
real stretch.
In other words, a nerd, like I really
nerd.
am. So, and then additionally, group and business transient travel saw compression in the weeks leading up to the November election. So a little bit more detail, because this is the really fascinating stuff for me. October demand increased by 2.7%. It's the largest advancement since March 2023. Its level was also the highest ever recorded for the month of October, 117.8 million rooms, surpassing the record set in 2019.
Wow.
More importantly, from April to October, room demand is up 0.9%. What's important is if you include the other months, room demand is only up 0.3%. So we are actually getting stronger. Each time we hit a peak, it's a higher peak than what we reached in the earlier part of the year. But here's the sad part. While demand was at a record level, ADR continued to grow below the rate of inflation, which it has done in 16 of the past 19 months. And then turning our gears toward the composition in terms of demand and the RevPAR by day of week, weekdays, Monday through Wednesday, produced the strongest results, with occupancy up 2 percentage points and ADR rising 2.7%, elevating weekday RevPAR by 5.8%. This was the second highest weekday RevPAR gain of the year, with May posting the highest at 6.2. And it's also important to know that over the past 10 months, weekdays are the only days seeing any occupancy improvement, although it's small, 0.2 percentage points, compared to a 1-point decrease on weekends, and then shoulder days are essentially flat. And interesting enough, ADR increases were also the largest on weekdays, up 2.6%, then followed by shoulders at 1.6 and weekends at 0.8. And as I said earlier, all chain scales saw RevPAR growth. It was led by luxury, which increased at 8% in the month of October. Interestingly enough, upper upscale had the lowest at 2.8. Even though we saw group demand come back up, it still saw the lowest actual RevPAR growth. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. ADR was the primary driver in the top two, luxury and upper upscale, while occupancy drove everything else. And then just to get a feel of occupancy for the chain scales, occupancy ranged from 74.4% in upscale, so that's the highest, to 57.8% in economy during the month of October. Now, thinking about group and thinking about that upper upscale RevPAR, monthly group demand reached its annual peak of the year, but it was down 1.1% from a year ago due to the shift in the Jewish observances. Even though they had less impact than they would have had they fallen more in the middle, they still impacted group demand. More importantly, group ADR increased 1.9%. And as we've been talking about, all the growth continues. Well, no, this month was different. We've said that all the growth over the past several months has been from the top 25 markets. And this month, both the top 25 markets and all other markets grew essentially at the same rate. And to give you an idea of how strong it's been in the top 25 markets in other months, over the past 10 months, RevPAR in the top 25 markets grew at more than 3 times the rate of the rest of the country. So again, it's still a top 25 market growth phenomenon, and it's still weekdays because you heard the weekday piece. So that's what's really driving our industry in 2024. And kind of finish this out in terms of the U.S. October year-to-date RevPAR is up 1.5% from 1.2% a month ago. ADR is basically driving it at 1.7% as occupancy decreased. But again, when you look at it against 2019, even though it's a solid month, and it's been so far a kind of so-so year, demand is still down 1.5% versus 2019. And then when you adjust for inflation, ADR is down 1.8% and RevPAR is down 6.3%. Again, this is adjusting for inflation against 2019. And we're still seeing bifurcation among the chain scales, with the upper tiers growing faster than the lower tiers. And so upscale led the chain scales with year-to-date RevPAR at 2.9%, while economy is lagging at minus 2.9%.
Let's unpack that. Can we unpack that a little bit before we go on to the international?
Sure.
Isaac, oh boy, seems like kind of the story of the year, right? Demand, right. ADR, below inflation. I mean, that's my scientific assessment. But Jan, what do you think? Isaac's talking about a lot of these like second highest of the year, second since peak, growth since here. How do we put that all into context?
So what I'm hearing is top 25, downtown, midweek is where the action is. The American consumer feeling the pinch, weekend not as strong as what we've seen, and sort of a leveling out. And I think hoteliers, when I talk to people in the field, are feeling that and are wondering, okay, is the party over? How can we continue to attract the leisure traveler, the more value-oriented leisure traveler? What do we have to do with our rates? What do we have to give in exchange? If we want to keep the rate, what do we have to give in exchange? How can we keep the value proposition intact? So I think the group piece, and I think the ADR change in group, a little bit higher than actually what it is for the nation, super interesting. Urban downtown properties, I think all of this continues to make me feel good about 24 and 25. I don't think that group demand is going to change drastically. I think corporate transient demand is going to change drastically. I think those things are here with us. I'm really, really interested, I don't want to say worried, interested about the weekend performance to see how that translates, when we come out of Thanksgiving and Christmas, but when we get into January and February, what are hoteliers going to do? And what is the American consumer going to do on weekends?
And I keep thinking about a lot of it is, again, experiential. And again, events are driving weekends, everything from football games to concerts, right? We're seeing that across the country. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting. January, we'll probably see a little weaker weekends because things will it's the end of the holidays and people trying to reset. But again, I think for me, as I think about it, and you mentioned our forecast, for me, it's more of the same right now. I know there's a lot of optimism for 2025, but right now, when I look at the data, when I look at the economic forecast, to me, it's just more of the same. And in fact, I was at a presentation last week and they called me gloomy Isaac. And I said, I'm not gloomy. I'm just more of the same Isaac. It's just like, and I said, we can't build this into our forecast yet, even though, yeah, we see the optimism. Lodging Conference was very optimistic. Some of the owners I spoke to at the conference I was at last week are optimistic, but it's optimism that's not supported by data or forecasts at this point.
Just yet, right?
Just yet, exactly. And once we start seeing some, we know what the new administrative change is going to be a big deal, and we know there's potential for an economy to really surge, but it's just potential right now. We don't know what that really means.
Yeah, Tourism Economics upgraded its GDP forecast for 2025 from 2.5% annualized to 2.6% annualized because they expect that the tax cuts will have impact on more spending from the corporations. I assume that some of this will trickle down into more group and more corporate transient. But we have been underwhelmed, honestly. And I think that's why our forecast was a little too high when we came out in Alice 2024 and looked at 2024. We were quite bullish on GDP growth equating to room demand. That did not materialize. So I think, Isaac's team has been quite cautious, and I think correctly so, in 2025, GDP growth not translating into huge demand surges. I think what Isaac said, slow and steady, we've seen this film before. That's our forecast. That's our outlook for today. I think what is the RevPAR forecast for 2025? 1.8%. 1.6%.
1.8, sorry. 1.8. Sorry.
1.8%. So I think we can all live with that. The question for owners is, of course, if you can't drive the top line very much, how do you drive the bottom line? What happens in the middle of the P&L in order to drive NOI?
And just to remind listeners, again, that 2.6% revision, that's the same what we're at this year. So that's, for me, more of the same, right? And then picking up on you said about the bottom line, again, when you have ADR growing below the rate of inflation, that is impacting your GOPs. That is affecting the margins because everything else is still rising in terms of cost. And so there's a lot at play here. And again, that's why it gets go more of the same, steady as she goes. We'll see what happens once we see real tangible proof of the changes to the economy. Right now, there's just nothing there to say it's going to surge in 2025 at this point in time.
And they kicked off this year, but it takes some time for those kinds of changes to be realized, to be, observable in the performance data.
Even tax cuts take time. They still, you can talk about them, but until it's tangible and in your pocket, there's not much there yet.
Then you're just talking.
You're just talking, exactly.
So take us overseas, Isaac, because you mentioned a couple highlights with, outside of North America performance, which has been strong over the last couple quarters.
It's been very strong. It's starting to normalize as well. So we've been talking about that, and you're starting to see evidence, but it's still really, really strong. Again, last year at this time, we were in double-digit RevPAR growth, and this year it's down to what it was, 6.7, whatever I said. So it's starting to come down. Global RevPAR among the 10 largest countries, and we do that based on supply, was again led by Japan, where RevPAR increased by 23%. Think about that. It's been phenomenal watching Japan. It's just this whole year, it's just very strong growth. Then you have Indonesia with gains of 16%. And then our southern neighbor, Mexico, at 13% increase. And this is all driven by ADR, which is also interesting. It's not occupancy, it is ADR gains. 7 of the 10 largest countries saw RevPAR growth, with France, Saudi Arabia, and China the only ones declining. And France is interesting because, again, we had the Paris Olympics. We would have thought they would be on the upside, but we also thought there was a vacuum as people stayed away because of the Paris Olympics, right? So they decided, hey, I don't want to go there. It's going to be too crazy. Let me go someplace else. And so we think that's what happened there, even though I happened to be in France this year, and it was fine. It was great. It was a wonderful time. And then RevPAR in China has declined in every month since March. And that's on the opposite, on falling ADR, not increasing, but falling ADR. And some of that could be, there's still a lot of economy properties coming into the marketplace, and there's still a lot of changes in China, as we've all read about in terms of its economy. And for the year, global RevPAR, excluding the U.S., is up 6.7%. And again, that's on ADR. Japan led the top 10 countries with RevPAR growth. This is a year-to-date number of 19%. And among the top 10 countries, only China has a year-to-date RevPAR that's negative, and it's negative at minus 4.6%. That's I did a very small summary on the outside the U.S.
I think Japan specifically, we have to connect it to the strength of the US dollar, and we have to connect it to the American leisure traveler saying, look, in 2023, I was in Venice and I was in Athens, and this year I want to go further abroad, maybe not during the vacation time. If I don't have kids in school, I can pick, my own travel months. And I think we saw that in the summer just with regular vacations, but I think we're going to continue to see that through the remainder of the year. It's a super interesting story.
And we also had a colleague of ours in Japan just a few weeks ago, and she said that her Japanese host said they're also seeing an influx of Chinese travelers. While they may not be coming into the U.S., they are definitely still traveling, those that still can afford it like everyone else, but they're going into Japan. So that was interesting to me as well. Don't have any more information than that. So I'm sorry, I'm going to leave you hanging. It's like, why? Don't know.
Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit later this episode. Actually, Isaac, it's something that I was going to bring up in my segment. But before we move on, Jan, I want to ask you, you were in Europe that last week. Did it feel like different from 2022? Did it seem like fewer people, higher ADRs? What was your take?
Well, I was in a little bit of a bubble because I was talking only to high-end hoteliers at a very high-end conference. The leading hotels.
Of course you were in a bubble. Of course. And did you fly your Lear?
A luxury. Hey, luxury is
right.
luxury.
And they were all feeling quite positive for the results they have seen and for the results that they expect for 2025. There, as you can imagine, it is not as much about the demand as it is about the room rate. And we'll probably talk about that in your segment a little bit more. So overall, I think the European hoteliers that I talk to are still, quite happy with the influx of the American traveler, given the strong dollar.
All right, Jan, you're up first this episode to share with us your topic of the month. And I know you want to talk a little bit about labor cost. You mentioned P&L earlier in this episode, but what is the data showing us at this point in the year about workforce wages? We've seen a lot of labor unrest over the last couple months. Where do we stand right now?
Yeah, so for this segment, I'm not actually using STR CoStar data, but I look back at the government data from the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they track, almost everything. They track two interesting numbers that it's interesting to overlay, where we're looking at the number of employees in the accommodation sector, and we look at the average hourly earnings of accommodations employees. So how many are there and how much do they make? And the way, I think the best way to show this in a chart, which you can't see because you're on a podcast, but I try to describe it, is to index it to 2020 and just say, look, if you set pre-pandemic to 100, where are we in terms of wages and where are we in terms of people who we employ? And we use the term bifurcation a lot, but there is an interesting maybe juxtaposition. There are some interesting trends that come out of that data. We have not fully restaffed all the people that were in the industry in 2020 when you look at today. So the index is at 91. So we're missing still 9% of people that we had employed in 2020. At the same time, the wages for accommodations employees the index is 130. So we're 30% higher than we were in 2020. That, I don't think, is a surprise to anybody who is in operations. The question to me is, why do we not have all the people back? Is it because the wage increase has not been strong enough? And the operator is saying, what are you talking about, Jan? 30% over 4 years, that is, a significant increase. But if we can't attract the talent, is maybe that 30% increase not enough? The other question is, are there jobs that just fell by the wayside? Are we letting people do more with less? Are we asking them to do more? Are there some jobs, some positions, some work that is no longer done by a human, that is done by the app? We're talking about check-in and check-out, ordering room service, what have you. All of those things can be automated and maybe automated away. So we're going to continue to look at this trend. I don't know when or how, what would compel us to hire all the people that we had in 2020. Maybe it's just a question of new supply, right? As new supply continues to grow, which right now is not, but over the next couple of years, we're going to see more new hotels. So maybe eventually we're going to hit the number of people who work in the hotel space that we saw in 2020. So that's an interesting question. On the wage side, I think the only way is up. Right, you talked about labor strikes. We've seen, the unions exerting their power, and getting really strong concessions and getting really strong increases in the hourly wages. And I was talking to an operator, this is in Hawaii, and I said, are you unionized? And he said, we're not. And I said, does it matter? He's like, no, it doesn't. Even if I'm not unionized, I still have to be competitive. I still have to pay the wages. And the truth is, I want to keep my people happy, because then I don't have these very, very restrictive work rules, and I can cross-train and I can move people around the property. And this GM told me, look, when I asked them, why don't you want to unionize? They're like, well, the union's knocking on our door all the time. But the workers saying, look, we like what we have here. We like the interaction that we have and the open lines of communication with senior staff and with the GM and with the executive team. So we're good. Just continue to pay us, what is competitive. And clearly that's set by the unions. So those are two interesting data points that I think we're going to continue to talk about.
I think, too, it's really competitive time period right now for third-party management companies. We've seen mergers, acquisitions happens at this turn of the cycle, but there is so much of that responsibility to stakeholders, and that these third-party operators need to prove. My guess, Jan, for your take on that reduced volume of employees is it's just been reduced headcount that may not necessarily come back. But that's my take. Isaac, what do you think?
From when I talk to owners, it's still very difficult to find for certain positions, right? It's not an easy task. So I think part of the gap in the employment numbers is, again, not having the supply, that people don't want to do these jobs. These are difficult jobs, especially the pieces that are missing, housekeeping. They're difficult jobs, and engineering, and they keep saying it's just very difficult, and they just haven't gotten the folks to get them.
And I am very curious to see if the new administration really follows through with mass deportations, right? Will we see other industries increasing their wages to attract labor? And does that then trickle down to the hotel space? Right. And will we see a somewhat rapid acceleration in wages? So that's something that I'm watching very closely.
And again, that's where it's going to be really interesting again on the GOP side, because if you see the rapid increase in wages, and again, pretty tepid ADR gains, right? So we did see, overall, you look at 2019 on a nominal basis, it looks phenomenal. It's up 20-something%. But then you take into account inflation, you're still in the deficit, as we just went through all those numbers. So yeah, it'll be interesting what happens to margins as we go forward, especially if it does happen, the deportations actually do happen.
So we do at Hotel News Now have a podcast that of course, these things change month to month, especially as new administrations come in. But we do have a podcast published with a lawyer looking at some of those potential labor and workforce related changes that may come through. Now, I have a question that always, whenever we talk about wage pressure and volume of employees, I think, what is the disconnect? Because luxury does so well and is able to command that rate, which of course has to flow into service and expectations there. And yet labor is still, there's a crunch on that. So how is it that those hoteliers are paying better, finding more people? If we hear that there's so much of a pinch on available labor, then how are luxury hotels, which are very high workforce, high touch, how are they managing?
I think part of it is what Isaac said. Number one, it may not all be unicorns and rainbows. I think they also have a very, very hard time.
Side, yeah.
They have a hard time attracting the labor, right? But in order to do that, you have to increase. That comes back then to that conversation that I had with a bunch of GMs last week, who were saying, look, it's all about the relationship that we have with our staff, that they want to come back. They can work almost anywhere, but how do we make sure that they come here? Yes, wages is part of the equation, but I think there's an intangible piece about open lines of communications and valuing the staff at the line level specifically that makes them come back. But I'm not sure that luxury hospitality is completely immune.
I agree.
All right, Isaac, it is Thanksgiving week here in the U.S. And of course, that means that busy period, holidays, end of the season, everyone's trying to squeeze in their last business trips before the new year. it's even more compressed this year. What can we expect from this high stress holiday season? I mean, nobody's just sitting back and watching Hallmark Christmas movies, are they? We're all trying to fit those last things in. What can we expect?
My sister-in-law is. I just found that out this weekend. So that's what I didn't know there was a Hallmark channel, and there's apparently 3 of them. So that's what she'll be watching.
We could do a whole episode on these movies. Maybe we'll do that.
Oh, and wait, as a side note, there's a Hallmark cruise. I had no idea about that either.
Well, you guys should be very interested because so many of the storylines center on hotels, charming B&Bs, country inns that are falling into problem, and they need somebody to come in and rescue them.
I was just going to throw that out there. There is a very, very famous.
We could do a special episode just reviewing the hotel-centric holiday Hallmark, Netflix, Lifetime movies.
Are you calling that set jetting? Just asking.
I think it could be. The cruise would be. So I think what we'll do is we'll take it to social media and we will ask our listeners to weigh in on their favorite hotel-themed holiday movie. But give us the real data, Isaac.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be kind of a warm holiday season. It's a kind of a warm holiday season.
That sounds like it could be the name of one of those movies.
Yeah.
Kind of warm holiday season. Well, I could give you the plot in 2 seconds.
Well, we'll have to talk about that afterward. There are 2 significant changes this holiday season. First, as we all know, Thanksgiving is a week later, meaning there are 5 less days, Steph, for you to go shopping to get my Christmas present. Between Thanksgiving and Christmas, so 5 less days. So we think that actually translates to some travel compression between the 2 holidays, between Thanksgiving and the way I looked at it between Black Friday and Christmas Eve, because I kind of thought of the Christmas shopping season. Second, and more importantly, Christmas and New Year's Day moved from a Monday last year to a Wednesday this year. Holidays that fall on a Monday are always a positive because you have that cherished long weekend. But when it moves midweek, it's not that great. And that's what we're thinking this year. So we see lots of ups and downs. We see it very mixed in terms of the whole holiday season. So for this week, for Thanksgiving, this week as we're recording this, the week of Thanksgiving, I should have said that. I actually see it flat to down. And I'm kind of nervous because I've just seen all the other forecasts of AAA. That's going to be a record season. I just flew in from Texas last night, and the airport was pretty busy on a Sunday. So I'm kind of nervous about it. But I look back all the history looking at when it's this late, and it tends to be flat. The last time it was on this late was in 2019. So I'm going to stick with our forecast. It's going to be flat to down, but I will tell you I am a little bit nervous about that. And again, as I said, this year's holiday season includes the fewest number of days between Thanksgiving and Christmas, only 26. This has only occurred 3 times in STR history, 2002, 2013, and 2019. And we look at STR history in terms of weekly data. Obviously, we go back to 87 with monthly data, but since this is all by weeks, that's the 3 times. We think this compression that's going to happen was only going to result in roughly a 0.1 percentage increase in occupancy with ADR about 1.8%. And again, I looked at all these 3 time periods, looked at it, and again, we've never seen anything more significant. I could be wrong, but it looks like it's still going, even though it's compressed, it's not going to be that impactful for the industry. Now, the Wednesday Christmas and New Year's Day. What's different this year from any other Wednesday Christmas is that it's moving from a Monday to a Wednesday. This has never occurred in STR history. So normally it goes from a Tuesday to Wednesday or a Monday to a Tuesday, but because of leap year, we're going from a Monday to a Wednesday. So it really compounds the impact of that shift. So that was actually really very interesting to us. So what I did to look at this piece of data, we looked at from the 24th to the 31st of December, the traditional holiday travel period. And we think, just looking at 2017, we didn't look at last year, which was on a Monday. We went back to 2017 and said, which was the most recent period prior to last year when the 2 holidays fell on a Monday, occupancy averaged 53.4%. In 2019, when Christmas and New Year's was on a Wednesday, occupancy came in at 52.4%. So 1.3 percentage points lower. And we kind of think that's what's going to happen this year. And we're actually thinking this year be a little lower occupancy at 50.4%, with ADR growth about the same as we've seen all year, about 1.5%. So overall, between Black Friday and New Year's Eve, we think the industry occupancy will be flat, with ADR increasing actually a little bit better, about 2%, even though that period, the real holiday period, will be lower. The compression will give us a little bit more ADR growth. So it's not anticipated to be jolly, but it won't be gloomy. Again, what did I say earlier? Just more of the same. So that's our
Not
holiday
gloomy
forecast.
Isaac, but
Yeah.
not gloomy Isaac. Can we call you Jolly Isaac?
No, not yet. But you could.
Well, the plot line for all the Hallmark Christmas movies is that, the hotel has to sell or has to succeed or fail by New Year's Eve. And it
Right,
usually
exactly.
comes in right at the stroke of midnight. So, hey, it might happen. Jan, what's your take on this compressed holiday season?
So first of all, I love that we do this. I think there's nobody else out there who does this. I know Isaac wrote about this on STR, but this is exactly why we do what we do. A holiday season is not like a holiday season. This deep dive, you can only get here and you can only get from STR and CoStar. So I think this is super, super helpful, I think, for the operators out there. I do wonder if 31st is a Wednesday, which means the 1st is a Thursday.
No, 31st. No, Wednesday is the holiday. The 1st is actually on a Wednesday. So 31st is Tuesday.
Sorry. So for the 1st is a Wednesday. So I wonder, do people then say, well, Thursday, Friday, can I just take the remainder of that week? Question mark. I don't know.
But I actually thought about that, Jan, and I think that's true. I think if you're of a higher income household, you may just take the full 2 weeks. Leave, you're not going to wait to leave on Tuesday. You'll leave on Sunday, the weekend. So yeah, that's the part that I couldn't quantify. And yeah, I thought about that a lot, because essentially I'm taking those 2 weeks off too. And I wonder how many other people are doing that. And so, yes, we could get a bump. It's just hard to quantify that. Again, it's always about trying to quantify it.
But I'm super happy to hear that you think that the ADR has a little bit more oomph. I mean, 2%, whatever, it's still not great, but it's not bad given what we've seen in the past. So that's great.
And we'll put a bookmark on that to come back to when we talk in January to see how the actuals turned out. All right, guys, for my topic of the month, I want to go back. Isaac, you mentioned earlier about travel to Japan. Hotel performance in Japan, RevPAR, demand, everything there. And we've heard here at Hotel News Now over the last month or so from a couple different big events and stories that we've done about the changing Chinese traveler. And this has been a topic that we've talked about on the pod before. It's super fascinating to me to hear about these changes. Now, of course, we're not seeing it happen quite yet in the U.S. because the U.S. has a pretty significant visa issue when it comes to attracting Chinese outbound travelers. But what's interesting to me, and I heard this first when I was in Asia last month, but we've heard it at European conferences and some other ones around the globe, is that a lot of Chinese travelers now, as they are starting to come back, are saying no to large tours and packaged travel, and they're instead going for these other trends that we've talked about throughout the last 2 years, which is higher end travel, smaller groups, maybe individuals, couples, families, a little bit of multi-generational travel. But outbound Chinese travelers are very interested in experiences outside of the hotel, in secondary destinations, not necessarily the big giant city centers around the world. And of course, they are doing a lot of this travel now intra-Asia, which is where we talk about Japan and Southeast Asia, a lot of other destinations around there. But it's really fascinating to me because, of course, it hasn't come back yet here. But when it does, I'm curious, and I wonder what cities will really be able to kind of realize the best of it. For so many years, San Francisco has said, oh, we can't wait for inbound Chinese travelers to come back, but I don't know, maybe not. I'm just curious to hear your take on that changing Chinese outbound traveler. Of course, we can't paint it all with a broad brush, but it's very interesting. Isaac, what do you think?
It's a hard question because I have several things going through my head right now. I wonder how likely they are to want to return, right? Because the rhetoric has been so negative toward China. Is if you don't feel welcomed, why would you want to come? Now, that being said, there's also things in the U.S. that are very unique. There's still, New York City is unlike any place else. Even San Francisco is unlike any place else. And there's a warmth and an experiential aspect to those cities, as well as many other cities across the nation, that still draw people in, including like the Grand Canyon. So there are still things that will bring folks in, but it's that the negativity of the political landscape that we've had over the last several years that I might keep them away. And then, of course, then you have the visa issue, which is a totally different thing. So I worry about that because, again, you want to feel welcomed. You never want to show up to a place where people don't want you there, right? Even with friends, family, you want to feel welcomed, and we may not be welcoming as we were prior to, even the pandemic.
And I'm not sure hoteliers can anticipate it the way they kind of had been building up for the last couple of years of, maybe next year, and we can kind of build this in to anticipate our visitor flow or our feeder markets.
And what I can say is that from a tourism economic standpoint, looking at the forecast for 2025, they do expect inbound travel to be 5% higher than it was in 2019. In 2025. So their expectations, now their forecasts have been pretty optimistic for some time, and they keep revising them downward, but it's still now they're at a 5% increase, which is possible. Globally, they're expecting inbound travel, overnight stays to increase by 30%, if I remember correctly. It was an incredible
number.
In
the U.S.?
No, just all over the world.
Okay.
So travel is happening, but again, they may not just be materializing into the U.S. for the variety of reasons we mentioned.
I would add, to me, the most important thing here is airlift. If you can't get there, if it's super complicated to get here, people are not going to do it. And just quick shout out and plug to this data set that we always use, which is not an STR CoStar data set, but the I-92 APIS data set, your favorite government statistic, which shows you how many...
Is that your custom license plate, Jan?
Yes, nerds unite. That is the number that shows you the number of flyers from airport to airport. So it's not just by country, but you can also do it by city pair, right? How many people are flying from Narita into LAX or something. It's very cool. It's very free. The Department of Commerce makes it available. So the question to me is always, number one, airlift. I think, Isaac, you sort of had half a sentence about visa. To me, that is a huge issue. Yes, you want to feel welcome, but number two, man, the visa wait times are critical to making this country open. And I think hopefully the new administration is going to staff embassies fully and get people to look at look at visa applications to say, okay, we want you in here, because as we all know, and as we've heard before, if you come from that far away, you stay longer. And you probably pay a little bit more because you want to have a nicer experience. So I would look at the West Coast first, then probably Vegas. I understand, Isaac, about New York City. Then you have to add another, 4 hours to that. So I would look at the West Coast first, but I would look at that I-92 data set and continue to follow that and see how the Chinese are traveling.
It'll be interesting to see how it happens into next year. There's so many topics we need to follow up on. And now it's time for our customary closing segment, in which you both share your hot takes on what hotel industry performance is like right now. And you know what? I don't know. I mean, listeners, you've taken this journey with us. The guys might choose a song, a candy bar, a Thanksgiving side dish. We've been doing this now for a year. We might need to change it up next year, but you keep coming back month after month with really interesting industry comparisons. Isaac, what do you have for us?
Well, you've mentioned this word multiple times. I mentioned it because it's been something I keep hearing about. It is anticipation. So I started thinking about that word, anticipation. And what song comes to mind? The one, the only, Carly Simon, anticipation, right? So that's my word for the industry this month. We can never know about the days to come, but we think about them anyway. And that's what I do as a forecaster. So it's like, that makes sense. But there's another song by the Arctic Monkeys back in 2006. And I love this one. It keeps me grounded a little bit. Anticipation has a habit to set you up. I hope that's not the case as we think about 2025. But I thought that was a really good, also line lyric saying, yeah, I got to be careful with anticipation. So that's
Ouch.
yeah.
Well, maybe for the end of the year, we will gift our listeners with the Spotify playlist of all of the songs that Isaac mentions. And Jan and I put on mute and then sing aloud while he's talking, because you will never hear at least me sing it out loud. But that's a great one. Jan, what do you got?
Well, given the season, I think the hotel industry right now is like sweet potato casserole. A, because I love sweet potato casserole, but B, it's just sort of there. It's just sort of the old standby. Isaac talked about the RevPAR forecast 2025 being 1.8%. It doesn't set the world on fire, but it's just something that you want and that you need and that sustains you. And when your aunt makes it, it's even better. So sweet potato casserole to me.
I like that. And the marshmallows on top is if you get a little bit of unexpected ADR premium.
So I got to ask, is there an equivalent in Germany, the sweet potato with marshmallows on top?
I would suggest heck no. we don't do the sweet part. We are a hearty people. It's it's a little bit more meat and potato, and this whole
straight up potato
frou thing. Yeah, that's all dessert. Like that would never be a dish in the main course. I mean, it's so sweet. We'd probably have that as dessert.
Well, we add sugar to it too. That's the American way.
Yeah, I can't wait. By the way.
Well, that is a great note to end on. As the guys mentioned, we are recording this during Thanksgiving week here in the United States, and we are thankful for you, our listeners. And of course, I am thankful to both of you, Isaac and Jan, for your insight. Find the latest global hotel industry news on hotelnewsnow.com. Find this podcast wherever you like to listen, subscribe, and make sure to give both follows on LinkedIn. See you all next episode.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy holidays.
Bye.
Hi, I'm Davon Reed.
I'm Omari Head.
And I'm Chris Henry.
We're the hosts of the Next Gen and Lodging podcast on the Hotel News Now podcast network. It's a monthly show in which we interview a new generation of hoteliers to get their insights into a variety of disciplines and topics, from finance to food and beverage and hotel operations. Listen to us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode of Tell Me More, a hospitality data podcast, was recorded on November 25, 2024 by me, Stephanie Ricca. The episode was edited by Sean McCracken. Find all hotel industry news at hotelnewsnow.com. Subscribe to this and all Hotel News Now podcasts wherever you like to listen. Just search for Hotel News Now. Thank you.